request VP Govinda Prabhu to introduce Maharaj. Maharaj, those who do not know Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Dandavat Pranam, Maharajji. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our Bhakti Vaibhava. And there are many souls here who've been in touch and assisted with you in the past, I think in Bhakti Shastri and many other courses, Maharajji. So for everyone, Aniruddha Prabhuji has already posted a bit of introduction, so I'm going to read that for the benefit of everyone. So His Holiness Bhakti Vigyan Vinasha Narasimha Maharajji was initiated by Srila Prabhupada in London in 1971. That's nearly 50 years. A year later, he received second initiation. He has been preaching for last 20 years in Asian countries such as India, Philippines, China, and Thailand. Through his years of preaching, he has given countless souls practical guidance and deep inspiration. Taking Kenya in Mayapur in 1994 from Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj. Much of a change in his lifestyle since Maharaj has always been strict in his sadhana. However, gets to know Maharaj, admires and respects his sincere and faithful practice of chanting holy names of the Lord. He truly walks his talks. Maharaj has been teaching with Mayapur Institute since its inception. Hare Krishna. Maharaj, we are looking forward to your association. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu, for your kind words. I'll try to live up to them. Okay, Om Jnanatimarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksurunmilitanyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhayavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So I have the good fortune of being with you for the next 3 weekends, and during that time we have to cover the remaining 5 chapters of the second canto. So we're beginning on chapter 6 today. So chapter 6 is Puruṣa-sūkta confirmed. So you've been studying, when did you begin the first canto? Must have been last year, maybe? At what time?
6 months. November.
November.
April, I'm sorry. April, Maharaj.
So April. Okay, so about 1 year.
6 months.
Good. All right, so here we are in second canto. We're still in the Padapadma, still seeing the lotus feet of the Lord. Very important for us to get a good basis, get a good grasp of the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna. And we can hold on to his lotus feet. It will help us to go through the rest of the course. So chapter 6 is entitled Puruṣa-sūkta. So Purusha, we know, we're always thinking we're the Purusha. Of course we're trying to be the Purusha, but we're not actually. We're tiny parts and parcels of the Lord. He's the actual Purusha. And Sūkta, Puruṣa-sūkta, when I hear Sūkta, I think of the Bengali Sūkta. Oh, very nice. Yeah, Sūkta. Yeah, my favorite, Bengali Sūkta. Anyway, this is Sūkta. This is a little different. This is Su meaning well or good, and Kata, this is spoken or words. So it's a glorification this Puruṣa-sūkta, the original Puruṣa-sūkta is there in the Rig Veda. Maybe some of you are worshipping Shalagram Shila, or maybe every day you recite Puruṣa-sūkta. Anybody?
Recording in progress.
Anybody reciting Puruṣa-sūkta? Sahasra Sirsa Purusha Sahasraksha Sarasraksha, like that, begins like that, you know. I think it's 15 or 18 verses. And it's a glorification of the Lord, how he has 1,000 heads, Sahasra Sirsha, 1,000 bodies, 1,000 heads, like that. So this chapter of the Bhagavatam is entitled Puruṣa-sūkta Confirmed. So we'll see in the course of this chapter how the position of the Lord is confirmed. In the Puruṣa-sūkta prayers, the Lord is glorified. I'll just try to read for you. I have a few of the verses here from the Puruṣa-sūkta. It begins, the Supreme Lord is a form of the universe and has 1,000 heads, 1,000 eyes, and 1,000 feet. For he contains all the living entities. Having pervaded the universe completely to give it existence, being independent, he extended himself. He extended himself if to a size of 10 fingers. So like that, this is something from the Rig Veda. Those of you who are interested, you can read the Puruṣa-sūkta from the Rig Veda. So this chapter of the Bhagavatam is confirming the teachings of the Puruṣa-sūkta, that the Lord is the cause of the universe, and everything in the universe is contained within the Lord. So we're seeing here in this chapter, Lord Brahma is instructing Narada Muni, his son. Narada Muni wants to understand who is actually the creator of the universe. There was some confusion in the mind of Narada. He was thinking that Lord Brahma was the supreme in the universe. But then he saw Lord Brahma meditating, and so he was puzzled, and he inquired from his father. And the result of that inquiry, Lord Brahma is speaking, explaining to him who is actually the creator of the universe. And he's describing, in this chapter, he begins with a description of the universal form, the Virata Rup, or the Virata Vishwarup, the Vishwarup or the Virata Rup, the universal form of the Lord. How within that form of the Lord everything is contained. Now you already studied the universal form in the beginning of the second canto. We had Sukadeva Goswami telling Maharaj Parikshit the first steps in God realization, but seeing the Lord through the different features of the universe. So here, in the beginning of this chapter, Lord Brahma is describing more about the Vishwarup, the different parts of the universal form of the Lord. And we can see something of the Lord, how he is responsible for everything which is within the universe. Indeed, there's nothing in the universe which is not from the Lord. It's all due to him. So the first verse, you can see, Lord Brahma said, the mouth of the Virata Purush is the generating center of the voice, and the controlling deity is fire. I don't know how fire relates to voice. That was a puzzle for me to read this. I don't quite get the connection with the voice and the fire. Anyway, we have to realize these things gradually as we go on. Anybody has any ideas how we can relate voice with the deity of fire? We all have a voice. How is it connected with fire? It's bewildering to the mind. This is all the inconceivable nature of the Lord, that so many things are just beyond the power of our mind and senses. We have to understand simply by hearing. All right, so then he talks about the skin and the 6 other layers, generating centers of the Vedic hymns, and his tongue is a productive center of different foodstuffs and delicacies for offering to the demigods, the forefathers, and the general mass of people. So that's reasonable. The tongue is the center of different foodstuffs and delicacies. We can understand the relationship there. We know the tongue is very fond of tasting. So Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, just reading from that first paragraph in the purport here, halfway through, he says, in the spiritual world, all the perverted forms of material variegatedness are fully represented in their original spiritual identity. The only difference is that material activities are contaminated by the 3 modes of material nature, whereas the potencies in the spiritual world are all pure, because they are engaged in the unalloyed, transcendental service of the Lord. So Prabhupada relates us to the spiritual world. He doesn't want to dwell on the material. He's always bringing us to understand what is the goal, that we want to understand connection to Krishna. So everything in this material world has its origin in the spiritual world. But in the spiritual world, everything is pure and uncontaminated. The material world is a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. So like that, we understand something of this universal form. Worshipping the universal form, it's something which, who would you say, what kind of people would be more attracted to worship the universal form? Let me ask you. Rajavijay Prabhu, can you tell me who would worship the universal form?
Mostly the karmis. Karmis, those.
Karmis? Well, karmis are generally fruitive workers, and they don't have an interest in spirituality. Their interest is really just sense gratification. Or are you talking about a karmi in the real sense, that they follow the Vedas but for sense gratification?
Yes, he does.
Understanding the universe in relation to the body of the Supreme Lord. We know... Yes?
は Hare Krishna Prabhu Maharaj, Dandavat Pranam. Maharaj, those who are attached yogis, neophytes, who do not believe in the Supreme Lord, and those who do not have attachment for the Supreme Lord, so they are like in the for them the universal form is there because they can see connect with the material elements of the universe with the Lord, with the limbs of the Lord, so they can be gradually like that's why this is from the gradual liberation, they go for gradual liberation, so this is for them.
Right, yes. Yes, some people, you know, you bring them to the temple, we show them deities, and they're like, they're just looking, is this God? You know, it's just beyond their comprehension, it's just too much for them to understand. They see the deities and they think, well, what is it? Is it just an exhibition, just dolls, exhibition, statues? They cannot understand the transcendental form of the Lord. They're not ready for it yet. But you take them to the countryside. You see a big mountain and a big river. You see you see the huge banyan tree, and we see the different planets in the sky. And people are, they're understanding, oh, there's some power behind this. Prabhupada writes how sometimes the Aboriginal people or tribal people, they will offer their obeisances, they will offer respect. If there's an eclipse, they think, oh, this is a very deep significance to them. And certainly there is significance to it, but they take it as some kind of omen to them. And they would be very respectful to a big banyan tree and a huge mountain, a volcano, things like that. So these are all different aspects of nature. And for more thoughtful people, we'll understand there's some personality behind all of this nature. In the beginning, just as the Mataji said, for people who are neophyte, they're not able to understand the transcendental form of the Lord. They need to practice seeing God through the material world, through the material energy. So we're given some descriptions here in these verses. All the different phenomena, different features of the world, they're all related to different parts of the body of the Lord. So text number 2 goes on. 2 nostrils, the generating center for breathing, all other airs. His smelling powers generate the Ashwini Kumars and all kinds of medicinal herbs. And his breathing energies produce different kinds of fragrance. His eyes are the generating center of all kinds of forms. They glitter and illuminate. His eyeballs are like the sun and the heavenly planets. His ears hear from all sides and are receptacles for all the Vedas. So hearing, very important part of Krishna consciousness. Vedic knowledge has to be heard. So the sense of hearing is vital. And then the eye, from the Brahma Samhita we know about the eye, right, being the sun. Right? You know that verse in the Brahma Samhita describing about the sun? Yes, go ahead.
I have
Okay, very good then.
I mixed.
Yeah.
Ajnaya Brahmati Samrita Kala Chakro Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami.
Okay, thank you. Yes. So like that, the sun, the king of all planets, is like the eye of the Lord. So this is also described here for us. Okay, going ahead, if we come up to text number 6, there's an important purport here. Prabhupada says actually the verse is important. He said this important verse of Srimad Bhagavatam is corroborated and nicely explained in the Bhagavad Gita. And then Prabhupada quotes the last 2 verses of the 10th chapter. You know, after studying Bhakti Shastri, you'll remember the 10th chapter describing the vibhutis of the Lord. And then at the end of the chapter, then Lord Krishna says, "O Arjuna, what need is there for all of this detailed knowledge? With a single fragment of myself, I pervade and support the entire creation." Right? And so that fragment of Krishna, what is that? Pervading, supporting the entire creation? Who is that?
The Paramatma.
Yes, right. The Super Soul, the Paramatma. Thank you. So the Lord is pervading the whole creation. And here, this verse is actually speaking about the great demigods and other leaders who protect the general mass. And Prabhupada goes through a long list. He mentions many different powerful leaders and heads of society. All of them are different powerful parts and parcels of the Lord. The Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, is the father of all living entities who are placed in different high and low positions according to their natural aspiration, according to their desires or aspirations. So we see everyone according to our desires and according to our ability. The Lord puts us into different situations. Some people are put into positions of leadership, and others are just ordinary, common people. They don't have so much responsibility. But the origin of all of these powers is actually coming from the Lord Himself. And Prabhupada writes here, as long as the powerful men of the world do not accept the origin of their respective powers, namely the personality of Godhead, the actions of Maya will continue to act. So it's very important that everyone understands whatever powers we have, it is simply due to the grace of the Lord. And it's not actually our doing, but it's the gifts of the Lord. He's given some people an opportunity to take some power, to have some power, and to have some position. He's giving everyone a chance to do something according to their particular qualification. And Prabhupada emphasizes this again. He says, the intelligent class of men, therefore, must admit the Lord as the ultimate source of all energies, and thus pay tribute to the Lord for His good blessings. So we have to recognize whatever we've got, it's His blessings. And it's very important for us to be satisfied with whatever the Lord bestows on us. Not to be always dissatisfied, anxious to increase, to do, but rather we should appreciate how merciful, how kind Lord Krishna is. So that will give us peace of mind. Prabhupada then goes on speaking about the importance of peace in the purport. So this is the point, to recognize how the Lord is controlling everything, and everyone, and he's ordaining for different people the due results of the fruit of their activities. So text 7 goes on to speak more about the different positions of the planets, and upper, lower, and heavenly planets, as well as for all that we need. His lotus feet serve as protection from all kinds of fear. Fear is something which we need to hear about. The nature of material life is fear. We're all fearful. We have a lot of fears. We're fearful of many different... We're not just fearful of death. We're fearful of old age. Some people are fearful their hair is going to go grey. Some people are fearful their hair is going to fall out. Somebody's fearful their business is going to collapse. Somebody is fearful they're going to get divorced. The marriage is not going to work out. Like that, there's so many fears which you have in material life. It's part of the material world. But we have to learn to take shelter of the Supreme Lord, and He can free us from all this fear. There's no need for us to be so fearful. We have to conquer over fear. And the only way you can actually overcome this fear is by taking shelter of Lord Krishna, by taking shelter of His lotus feet. Right? Maybe you know that verse. Prabhupada was in the hospital, in New York, when he'd first gone to America. Prabhupada had some heart problem, and devotees took him to the hospital. And at one point, the doctor brought this huge needle, and they stuck it into Prabhupada. And after they took it out and went away, one of the devotees asked Prabhupada, "Was it painful, Prabhupada?" And Prabhupada looked at the devotee and said, he quoted the verse, maybe you know that verse, Samashritaye padapalavam papam mahatpadam punya yasho marari bhavam buddhir vatsat padam 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 tadvipadam natesham. That for one who has accepted the shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, then the ocean of the material existence becomes as insignificant as the water contained in the footprint, in the hoofprint of a calf. And the devotee's destination is the spiritual world. The devotee's not going to stay in the material world, because he knows this material world, there's simply danger in every step. Right? That's the point. The danger in every step in the material world. But for devotees, there's no danger because they've taken shelter of Krishna. Devotees are not in danger, in any fear, or they shouldn't be in any fear, because we understand we're under the protection of Lord Krishna. We have the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. There's nothing to fear. We have to have that faith. Right? Have you all got that faith? I hope so. Okay, so the chapter goes on. We hear more about different parts of the universal form. The Lord's genitals originate water. Semen generatives, rains, and the procreators. His genitals are the cause of a pleasure that counteracts the distress of begetting. It may be puzzling to people, the distress of begetting. Most people think it's a pleasure to have a child. But here it talks about the distress of begetting. Well, Krishna is very clever that he counteracts that distress, that fear which is in people's mind. Oh, another child. Oh, a child. Do we want a child? Sometimes like that, people have that fear. One person who recently became a devotee, he told me how, before he became a devotee, his wife had conceived a child. So they already had one child. So he asked his mother-in-law what she thought. And she said, well, if it's another boy, oh, it will be so much trouble to take care of. She said, girls are a bit more peaceful, but a boy is a lot of trouble to take care of. So then he asked his wife's mother, in other words, his mother-in-law, and she said, oh no, not another child. She said, I don't think I can handle taking care of it. So the result was his wife had an abortion. So that's kind of the common situation in the world today, around the world. We get this, that people are in fear of having children. They don't like the idea of bringing up children. But we should understand it's a wonderful service to do. To bring children into the world and to raise them to become devotees of Lord Krishna. It's a very wonderful duty and very much appreciated by the Lord. Of course, it's a very difficult task to bring children into the world. It's difficult enough. I know so many couples who wanted a child, somehow they couldn't get a child. And those people who did get children, it's very difficult to bring them, to keep them in Krishna consciousness. That's a challenge. Although you may try to do everything. Prabhupada's own children, Prabhupada would bring them to the temple and so on. But once they grew up, they were not too much interested in Krishna consciousness. They just wanted to have a normal life. Normal life meant just, enjoy material life. They didn't think about any higher purpose. All right, and then Brahma then text 9 goes on to talk about nasty places, the backside of the Lord, the evacuating hole, the rectum of the Lord. It's a place of envy, misfortune, death, hell. Prabhupada was traveling in a flight in the USA, and at one point the pilot on one of these flights was very nice, and he came and spoke to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said he was a very intelligent man. He was asking Prabhupada questions. Then he asked Prabhupada about where does evil come from. So Srila Prabhupada explained to him, just like it's described here, he said evil is the backside of the Lord. Just like the sun is in the front. So you can turn away from the sun, you can turn your back to the sun. You don't see the sun. So the same way there's good, there's also evil. So everything comes from God. There's nothing independent of God. Good comes from Him, and evil also comes from Him. So this is described here. And then goes on to, we hear about the bones are like the mountains, and the rivers are like the veins. Nice examples. text 11 speaks about the impersonal feature, the oceans, his belly, the place for materially annihilated living entities. His heart is the abode of the subtle material bodies of living beings. Thus, it is known by the intelligent class of men. So in the Lord's heart, who is in the heart of the Lord? Who would be in the Lord's heart? Yes, right. The Lord says, devotees are in my heart. And who's in the hearts of the devotees? Of course, the Lord. So there's that reciprocation. Here, described a little different. The abode, his heart is the abode of the subtle material bodies of living beings. So, the subtle body of the living beings. I always seem to have this karma. Whenever I give a class, they start these really noisy machines. Can you hear it in the background there? You're okay? Huh? It's okay? Okay, we'll tolerate it. Huh? All right, so then text 12 goes on to speak about the 4 Kumaras, bachelors, and about their consciousness. And that consciousness is the abode of truth and transcendental knowledge. And then we go on to hear about the Lord, how his size is not more than 9 inches. As the Super Soul, he expands by his potency in the shape of the universal form. And the universal forms including everything. So this is the wonder of the Supreme Lord. And this is the teachings we get, that everything is Krishna, and at the same time Krishna is different from everything. Everything rests on the energy of Lord Krishna, but at the same time the Lord is different from everything. He remains always transcendental. We have to understand how perfect the creation of the Lord is. We are given the example how he is Purnam, everything. And of course we recite from the invocation of the Ishopanishad, Prabhupada put that invocation, that Om Purnamada Purnamidam. That Purnam indicates the perfect nature of the creation of the Lord. That everything animate and inanimate is all created by the Lord. It's all perfect. Everything is here for our maintenance. There's no deficit. Everything is provided. And so that's the perfect nature of the creation. So by studying the universe, we can understand how perfect the creation is, And we should understand that behind that creation, there's a creator. That it's not just simply by chance, but there's a personality behind it. It's all under him. And we should think how foolish these people are who fail to recognize the existence of God. That they say, oh, everything just came from a big bang, or it just came out of the black hole, or as the Buddhists say, it's all illusion, nothing is real. And so many foolish theories. But to a devotee, it's so obvious that there's a personality in this world, that there's a person behind this world. And he's the perfect person, and he is the person responsible for this whole creation. So after describing some features of the universal form, then Lord Brahma goes in to describe more about the Lord himself, about the particular energies of the Lord. In text 17, we hear about the internal and the external energy of the sun. And he said, in the same way, the personality of Godhead expands this universal form, maintains everything in the creation, both internally and externally. Internally, it's maintaining everything as the Lord himself, and externally in the form of the different demigods. Reading from Prabhupada's purport, Prabhupada says, so the universal form of the Lord is the secondary imagination of the impersonal form of the Lord. But the primary form of the Lord is Shyamsundar, with 2 hands, playing on his eternal flute. 75% of the expansive radiation of the Lord is manifested in the spiritual sky, Tripad Vibhuti, and 25% of his personal radiation comprehends the entire expansion of the material universe. So we're hearing about the Tripad Vibhuti and the Ekapad Vibhuti. 2 different features of the Lord's energy. The Tripad Vibhuti represents the spiritual potency, and the Ekapad Vibhuti is the material potency. So the spiritual potency, that is what Shakti of the Lord? I thought it would be the Chit Shakti. You think Samvit. And what potency is the material world, the Ekapad Vibhuti? That is which Shakti? Maya Shakti, right. Maya Shakti. So the Maya Shakti, and in the spiritual world, we have the Chit Shakti. And the living entities, we are the Tatastha Shakti. And we are in between. Prabhupada explains the living entities, in the purport, text 19, the living entities who are residents of the spiritual as well as the material expansions are his marginal energy, and they are at liberty to live in either of the energies externally or internally. Those who live within the spiritual expansion of the Lord are called liberated souls, whereas the residents of the external expansions are called conditioned souls. We can just make an estimate of the number of the residents of the internal expansion in comparison with the number of residents of in the external energy, and may easily conclude that the liberated souls are far more numerous than the conditioned souls. So Prabhupada's pointing out to us to remind us, we're the minority, we're very small, we're the prisoners in the material world. Just like in every country, they will have the prison house, and most of the people are free. But within the prison, there's a few rebellious souls who are placed in the prison house. So similarly, we are the conditioned souls. We are the 1/4 of the energy of the Lord, placed in this Ekapat Vibhuti. And the spiritual sky, there are many, many more planets, many, many more living entities who are all free, who are all enjoying in the spiritual world. Right? What's it? The three energies in the spiritual sky? There are just as there are three modes in the material world, so there are also three potencies in the spiritual world. Yes, Samvit, Sandini, and Ladini. Right. The material world is goodness, passion, and ignorance. So the spiritual sky, those souls in the spiritual world, they enjoy under the spiritual potency. They enjoy full freedom because they're fully dedicated to the service of the Supreme Lord. However, those souls in the material world, we're the prisoners. We are here placed in this world to reform. So from text 18, Prabhupada says, it is said that those planets in the spiritual sky, which comprise the 75% expansion of the internal potency of the Lord, are far, far greater than those planets in the total universe, composed of the external potency of the Lord. The comparison between the two regions is given for some length in the purport here. Prabhupada's explaining. Would someone like to bring up some of the points? What are some of the main differences between the spiritual world and the material world? In text number 18, what are the main points there which Prabhupada is bringing up from the purport? Yes.
It says the birth death cycle is there in 8 pada, but it's not there in 3 pada. The nature of the soul.
What is there in the egg pada, not in the tree pada?
So 8 pada, the birth cycle, the vicious circle of birth and death.
Birth and death. Okay. Yes.
In 3 pada, there is no birth and death.
Right. Tripada, there's no birth and death? Yes?
Full of anxiety and fearfulness.
Sorry?
In material world, there is always anxiety and fearfulness in the heart of all living entities.
All right.
But in spiritual world, fearlessness, because of the Supreme Father is there with us.
Yes. They're enjoying without anxiety, without fear.
In eighth path there is forgetfulness, avidya, and only within three paths.
The material, in the material world, we're forgetful, we're in avidya, in ignorance of our relationship with the Lord. And in the spiritual world, what is the situation?
No ignorance, we are always in vidya. We are aware of our relationship with the Lord.
Yes, right. In the spiritual world, everyone is in full knowledge. They're remembering their very relationship. Everything is dedicated for the service of the Lord.
Also, Satchitanand is there in the spiritual world, not in the material world. Eighth path, there is no Satchitanand, or it's very less experience of Satchitanand.
Here is Niranand, right? No bliss. And there is Anand. Our world is Asat, theirs is Sat. And theirs is Chit, ours is Achit. So material world is the opposite of the spiritual world. I'm sorry, Prabhu, I can't quite hear everything you're saying.
So in the material world, there is always the influence of time which changes things from one stage to another. But in the spiritual world, there is no time.
All right? The influence of time is absent in the spiritual world. Due to the influence of time, everything degrades, everything deteriorates. Due to the influence of time in the material world, we see our bodies age. So what about in the spiritual world? What happens? Do people age? Is there old age in the spiritual world? Do people get old?
No. There is no effect of age.
No old age.
Eternal youthfulness.
Eternal youthful, yes, right. They enjoy eternal youth. No old age.
No disease.
Yes, no disease, no doctor's bills.
In Ek Path Vibhuti, the controller is Maya Devi, and she gives 3 paths to the living entities according to their prarabdha and karma. But in the material, in the spiritual world, there is no tritap, there is all enjoyment.
Okay. So, Prabhupada spoke about something about this Brahma Bhut. The nature of the spiritual world. They enjoy spiritual bliss. But we, because of our material bodies and because of our identification with the material world, we cannot experience that. Yes? Anything else?
Prabhupada also mentions that in the material world, we have to work very hard to get a little bit of happiness. But in the spiritual world, happiness is the nature of spirit, so it's full of happiness.
Oh. Yeah, you don't even have to try for it. It's just, by nature, it's just, life is just joyful there, every moment. But, as you say, in material life, we have to work very hard for a little happiness in the material world. So Prabhupada writes here at the end of the purport, spiritual happiness in the eternal kingdom of God cannot be imagined even by the great brahmacharis or sannyasis who are eligible to be promoted to the planets beyond the region of heaven. Or the greatness of the Supreme Lord is so great that it cannot be imagined even by the great brahmacharis or sannyasis. But such happiness is factually attained by the unalloyed devotees of the Lord, by His divine grace. Okay, going ahead, text number 20 again, 19. Prabhupada still, well, Lord Brahma is still speaking about the comparison between the spiritual world and the material world. It says, deathlessness, fearlessness, and freedom from the anxieties of old age and disease exist. Exist in the kingdom of God, which is beyond the higher planetary system and beyond the material covering. So if we want to get beyond fear and death, and we want to be free from all the anxiety, we have to go beyond the coverings of the universe. It's not enough to just go to heaven. It's not enough just to go to the higher planets. We have to go beyond that. And Prabhupada talks about the different planets, Swarga, Martya Loka. Well, Martya, Patala Loka, they're lower planets, but higher planets, Swarga, heaven. But you have to enter into the Vaikuntha planets in order to get really free of the suffering. Even in the higher planets, no one is free from the suffering. Even you go all the way up, he mentions about Maharloka. Maharloka, that's above Swargaloka. You have Janaloka, Maharloka, Tapaloka, and then Brahmaloka or Satyaloka. So even you go up to Maharloka, there's a fear. There's going to be annihilation. You have to go to higher planets. So anxiety is everywhere in the material universe. This is the point. Even you go all the way up to these higher planets. Even Lord Brahma, he has to worry about giving up his post and leaving his position there as the creator of the material universe. He has to worry about that also. Not just us, even Lord Brahma has to worry about it. In text 20, the Lord's the spiritual world, consisting of 3/4 of the Lord's energy, is situated beyond this material world, and it is especially meant for those who will never be reborn. Others are attached to family life, and who do not strictly follow celibacy vows must live within the 3 material worlds. So there's some discussion here about the benefits of practicing celibacy. The highest benefit that can be awarded to a human being is to train him to be detached from sex life, particularly because it is only due to sex indulgence that the conditional life of material existence continues birth after birth. But as long as the bodily attachment for sensual enjoyment is encouraged, the individual spirit soul is forced to continue the repetition of birth and death on account of the material body, which is compared to garments subjected to the law of deterioration. Any form of religious principle in which the followers are trained to pursue the vow of celibacy is good for the human being, because only those who are trained in that way can end the miserable life of material existence. And then Prabhupada talks about Buddhists and how they practice nirvana. Of course, Buddhist monks, they're meant to practice strict celibacy. And even you see in the Christian church, the Catholic priests, they also take vows of celibacy. Of course, it's very difficult for them. You know, there's always a lot of agitation in the Catholic Church. The priests want to get married, but at the same time they want to remain priests, and it's not allowed in the Catholic Church. So they're always trying, there's always people trying to reform. The priests want to marry, they want to marry, but they're not allowed to. The church doesn't allow it. So it's actually very difficult for them to practice celibacy because they don't follow any rules. They eat all kinds of, animal flesh, and they drink also wine and other alcohols. And they do things like gambling. They don't follow any religious principles, hardly. But they're supposed to practice celibacy. They eat meat, they take intoxication. So very difficult for them to try to practice celibacy. But if people are trained in Krishna consciousness from the beginning, then it's much easier. If from the beginning of life, people are taught the basic principles, then it's much easier. So Prabhupada talks about the Buddhists, the Shankarites, and the Vaishnavites. They all talk about the value of abstinence from the associating intimately with the opposite sex. So, but in the spiritual world, it comes up. A Buddhist monk was asking me about what is the nature of the spiritual world. He'd heard us talking about the spiritual world. So he was a Buddhist. In Buddhism, they have the Western world. And in Buddhism, there's no men and there's no women. There's only Buddha. So you go to the spiritual world, everyone is a Buddha. There's no male, there's no female. So he asked me, how is it in Krishna consciousness, in the spiritual world? Do you have men and women? So I told him, yeah. I said, there are men and women, and people are even married. They have their wives. But they're very peaceful, they're very happy. They're not controlled by sex, because they experience the higher pleasure. They experience Krishna consciousness. They've purified their mind and senses. They're able to enter into the spiritual world. And they can live together peacefully. Not like in the material world, where people are just servants of the senses. So it's very different. You can see, we have a very perfect philosophy. If everyone is a Buddha, then what do they do there? They're all Buddhas. Everyone's a master, no one's a servant. I can't imagine how they all managed to live together. Okay, any comments so far? Anyone has any questions or comments?
Maharaj, I have a question.
Yes, Prabhu.
Maharaj, is in verse 13 to 16, Prabhupada has mentioned the translation that the size of Paramatma is not exceeding 9 inches.
Yes.
Just trying to understand about this, because whose reference to this 9 inches is talking? Because there are so many living entities which are very minute in size in their body, in this material world. So how to understand Paramatma's feature within their heart with the 9 inches? How to understand this?
We would understand it in relation to in proportion to the body. That the human body has super soul according to the heart. There will be a particular size of super soul. Of course, somebody has a very tiny body, tiny insects, they also have the super soul. So what size will be the super soul? How do we understand? The 9 inches is in proportion to the body of the living entity.
And also, Maharaj, it is mentioned that eternally existing. Means in the spiritual world, the Paramatma's feature is in the 9 inches. How to...
In the spiritual world, there is no super soul.
Yeah. Then how to understand it's eternally existing?
It's eternally existing in the material world, under the external energy and external potency of the Lord. At the time of the annihilation, the super soul will... Just like we have Vaikuntha planet. Dhruva Maharaj's planet is Vaikuntha planet, right? It's not annihilated at the time of the annihilation. It remains. Everything enters into Mahavishnu, and Dhruva's planet remains. And when there's creation, then Dhruva's planet is there again. So similarly, the super soul. We have Sweta Dweep. Sweta Dweep, Kshirodakashayi Vishnu is residing there. So the Paramatma is expanded from Sweta Dweep, from the Lord on Sweta Dweep, Kshirodakashayi Vishnu. And so everything enters into the one form of Kshirodakashayi Vishnu at Sweta Dweep. And then again with creation, then the super souls enter into the heart of all living entities.
Maharaj, like here in this slok, universal form is mentioned, but when in Bhagavad Gita we study that universal, we learned that universal form spreads everywhere. There's no beginning, no end, no middle.
The universal form? Yeah, well, the universal form is material, right? It's material. In that sense, that it's created, but the elements of creation, because it's the Lord's energy, it's all eternal, right? The Lord's prakriti is eternal. It's just sometimes it's manifest and sometimes it's not. So Prabhupada gave the example, he said, just like clouds, you see clouds in the sky. Sometimes you see the cloud and sometimes they're not there. They're just not manifest. So the same way the Lord's prakriti, this inferior prakriti, sometimes it's manifest and sometimes it's not. So the universal form, of course the universal form is subtle. It's not a gross form, it's subtle. But sometimes it's manifest, sometimes it's not. At the time of the annihilation, then it's an unmanifest form.
But why in this shloka it's mentioned universal form? Why not super soul is mentioned only? Because universal form spreads everywhere, and super soul is 8 to 9 inches.
Yeah, the super soul was mentioned 8 to 9 inches. Why is the universal form not mentioned?
Here in this verse, universal form of the Lord is mentioned.
Right.
And why not super soul is mentioned? Because super soul is 8 to 9 inches, and the universal form is all pervading, all spreading.
Yeah, that's right. How do you measure the universal form?
Yeah.
Prabhupada brings up that point. He said, you know, when we talk about the how can we have devotion for the universal form? You cannot dress it.
Yeah.
So that's a problem with the universal form. But Prabhupada also explains that there's no real purpose in contemplating the universal form unless it brings out the mood of service. We have to take up the mood of service to the Supreme. You know, people go and they look at nature and they say, oh, God is great, but they don't do anything, they don't do any service. They appreciate nature. It's like Shantaras. Shantaras, you appreciate the beauty of the Lord, but you don't do any service. So people appreciate, they like to look at nature, oh, the countryside, oh, the beach, the ocean, the stars. They're thinking, so wonderful, so nice to see everything, but they don't do any service. They don't take up any practical activity. So the real purpose in contemplating the universal form is that we will want to serve the Lord. We will understand that behind that universal form, there is a creator. There's a personality behind that universal form. And that personality of Godhead is superior to the universal form. And this is an important point which should come out from this section. That we want to understand that the Lord is superior to the universal form. And we should take up service for the Supreme Lord.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Yes, Prabhu.
Please, I need your assistance to be able to understand this purport in text 20, where it is mentioned the glorification of celebrity. And then Prabhupada goes further to say in the purport, the householders and persons who have deliberately broken the vow of celibacy cannot enter into the kingdom of deathlessness. Means householders are sure not to go to the spiritual world. I find it difficult to understand it.
Well, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say all householders. But he explains, he said, the pious householders, or the fallen yogis, or the fallen transcendentalists can be promoted to the highest planets within the material world. But they will fail to enter into the kingdom of deathlessness. But then Prabhupada continues, the vanaprasthas, or those retired from family life, the sannyasis, the renounced, they cannot break the vow of celibacy if they want success in the process. So then Prabhupada talks about the fall down, and then he says, in good families of learned brahmanas or of rich merchants, they get another term of elevation. But the best thing is to attain the highest perfection, deathlessness. So the idea is, you're in householder life, don't be in Grehamedi life. right? There's the Grihastha, Ashram, and Grihamedi life. A Grihamedi lives in householder life just for his sense gratification. But if you're actually Grihastha, then Krishna's in the center of the house. And it's a life of control. There's control over the senses. We see the Mahajans, most of the Mahajans are householders. So we shouldn't think that being a householder means you're fallen. We have Swayambhu, Narada, Shambhu. Swayambhu Brahma is a householder. Lord Brahma is speaking. And Shambhu, Lord Shiva, is a householder. The Pralado, Janako, Bhishmo, Pralada, Jarika, both householders. Bali, Vyasaki Vayam, Bali Maharaj, a householder. And Yamaraj, a householder. You know, they're all great Mahajans. They're the authorities in devotional service. They're in householder life. So why you're worried? You follow their example. Mahajano Yenagatapat Sapanta. Follow in the footsteps of the Mahajans. And these Mahajans are all mentioned. And several of them are householders. So there's no problem. But don't be a Grihamedi. That's the point. And don't be, and Grihamedis, they're probably better off than the fallen sannyasis. If somebody's a sannyasi and he's in Maya and addicted to illicit connection, then his position is much worse. Right? Grihe dako vanisako sabahari boli dako. Lord Narottam Das Thakur said, it doesn't matter if you're in family life or if you're renounced life. If you're a devotee, I want your association. And Lord Chaitanya took the association of Ramananda Rai. Ramananda Rai was in family life. But when Lord Chaitanya met him, Lord Chaitanya questioned Ramananda Rai. And he told Ramananda Rai, if you know the science of Krishna, then you can become guru. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was in family life. Look how many children he had. He is the seventh Goswami. So no problem. But don't be a Grihamedi. That's the point. Be a transcendentalist. Okay, we have to go. Yes, Maharaji? Okay.
Maharaj, can we think that like the connection between voice and fire is that because the universal form is connected with the material, more with the materialist people further. So whenever these materialist people speak, the fire only comes from their mouth because they will speak nonsense and materialistic talk only. That is like fire, and so the voice is connected to.
Okay, that's a good speculation. I don't know, but it's certainly quite realistic what you say, that they speak like fire. Sometimes we say they speak like thunder, voices like thunder. When Lord Krishna went with Bhima and Arjuna to see Jarasandha, they were dressed as brahmanas. But Jarasandha thought, these people couldn't be brahmanas. Their voices were like thunder because they were Kshatriyas. They're Kshatriyas, so they speak very powerfully and authoritatively. So sometimes people with voices like thunder, sometimes their words may be like fire, they burn. Okay, going ahead, text 21. We hear about the energies of the Lord. He's the master of both nescience and factual knowledge. Alright, so we hear about the forgetfulness of the living entity, described in the second paragraph of the purport. And because the living entity is partially cognizant, he is therefore sometimes forgetful of his own identity. This forgetfulness is specifically manifest in the field of the Ekapad Vibhuti of the Lord, or in the material world. But in the Tripad Vibhuti, field of actions, or in the spiritual world, there is no forgetfulness by the living entities, who are free from all kinds of contamination resulting from the forgetful state of existence. All right, so we forget. That's the problem. That forgetfulness, that is the avidya. And then Prabhupada talks about the different stages of avidya in the form of dharma, artha, and kama and moksha. And of course, their idea of moksha is just becoming one with the Lord. So like that, we understand the position of the spiritual world compared to the material world. The Lord is thus the proprietor. At the end of the purport of 21, the Lord is thus the proprietor of the fields, both of nescience and of cognition, and remains the choice of the living, and it remains the choice of the living entity to exist in either of the above regions. Krishna gives us independence. He doesn't force us. We choose. Where do we want to be? We are responsible. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I'm not responsible for the sins or the pious activities of people. They do it themselves. So we suffer and enjoy according to our own actions. Krishna gives us independence. All right, now we're going to hear about the Lord and his situation. In text 22, it's described here, just reading to you. The Ekapad Vibhuti manifestation of the material energy is just like one of the many mistresses of the Lord, but whom the Lord is not so much attracted as indicated in the language of the Gita, Bina Prakriti. But the region of the Tripad Vibhuti, being a pure spiritual manifestation of the energy of the Lord, is, so to speak, more attractive to him. So the Lord has his own what's attractive to him. He expands himself as the gigantic form of the Vishwarup. The Vishwarup, as it was shown to Arjuna, is not the original form of the Lord. The original form of the Lord is the transcendental form of Puruṣottama, or Krishna himself. It is very nicely explained here. He expands himself just like the sun. The sun expands itself by its terrible heat and rays, yet the sun is always aloof from such rays and heat. And then Prabhupada talks about how the impersonalists see everything. They consider the rays of the Lord without any information of the actual form of the Lord. They don't understand that the rays of the Lord have to come from somewhere. There's a planet where everything comes from. And the same way, everything that we see in this world, it comes from someone. And Prabhupada quotes a verse from Brahma Samhita, Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavitabi, Tabirya Eva Nijarupa Kaya Kalabi. Right? That everything, that although Krishna is in Goloka, he's present in every nook and corner of the universe, in each and every universe. He's present everywhere by his different potencies, by his different energy. So then text 23, Lord Brahma begins to speak about his birth and about how he felt the need for sacrifice, that he's taken his birth and he understands the purpose of life, that there should be some sacrifice, that he should want to do something for the person who's produced him, who's created him. We want to sacrifice for others. And in the purport, Prabhupada talks about animal sacrifices. But this is not Brahma's intention. Brahma also wants to do sacrifice, but the problem was, described in text 23, there were no ingredients except the bodily limbs of the personality of Godhead. So how to do sacrifice? You have to get there has to be the different things to perform sacrifice. You have to have ghee, you have to have fruit, flowers, you have to have priests, and so many different things are needed to do a yajna, right? Whenever we have a yajna, we know what's involved, all the procedures and preparation. So Lord Brahma is thinking about doing sacrifice. He wants to make an offering, do something to satisfy the Lord by his yajna. But where to get the materials? Prabhupada writes in the purport, nothing is created out of nothing, but everything is created from the person of the Lord. And then Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita 10, verse number 8, how Krishna is the source of everything. And then Prabhupada brings up the impersonalists, the impersonalists, how they argue that there's no need to worship God. They say everything is nothing. Everything is God himself. So God doesn't need to worship God. That's what they would say. But Prabhupada said a devotee will worship God out of a sense of gratitude. He will use whatever comes from the body of the Lord in the service of the Lord. And Prabhupada gives the example, just like you take some water, when you take bath in the Ganges, you take the water of the Ganges in your hand and you offer it back to the Ganges. That is the procedure. So the same way the devotee takes whatever the Lord provides and we use it in the service of the Lord. That is the perfect sacrifice. Sometimes we give the example, you find some money in the street. The karmi will take the money for his own sense gratification. The jnani will leave it there. He will say, Maya, don't touch it. But the devotee will take the money and he'll use it for the service of Krishna. He'll go and buy fruits and flowers to offer to Krishna. Or he'll put the money in the donation box for the service of the temple. Something like that. So we have different visions about everything. There's a vision of the devotee and the vision of the impersonalist. Okay, text 25 describes the different kinds of people, 4 different kinds of people who perform sacrifice. You're going to do a yajna. Usually you don't just do it on your own. There should be somebody who can make who does the offerings, somebody who chants the mantras, somebody who kindles the fire, and then somebody who is the supervisor. So at least 4 people should be there. 4 brahmanas should be there to do the yajna. But in our Kali Yuga, we don't have to worry. Our yajna is much easier. We will do the Sankirtan yajna. Kali Yuga Dharma, Harinam Sankirtan, Krishna Shakti Vininahi Tara Pravartan. Right? Chaitanya Charitamrita says in the Kali Yuga, the Dharma is the chanting of the holy name. Yagnavai Vishnu, Harinam Sankirtan. Chanting of the holy name. That is the real sacrifice for the Kali Yuga. However, the birth of Brahma, with Brahma appearing from the lotus flower, he's doing a different sacrifice. Kali Yuga, we didn't have any brahmanas to chant the holy name, to chant the Vedic mantras. But Lord Brahma, he can chant. He's there in the Satya Yuga, the beginning of the age. So he's able to do all these things. So we hear about the different necessities being produced for the service of the yajna. Text 27, Lord Brahma said, I had to arrange all the necessary ingredients and paraphernalia of sacrifice from the personal bodily parts of the personality of Godhead. By invocation of the demigod names, the ultimate goal, Vishnu, was gradually attained, and this compensation and ultimate offering were complete. So Brahma is describing how he was able to do the yajna. He chanted the names of the demigods, then came to the ultimate goal, Vishnu. This is the Vedic system. They will worship the demigods, then come to the goal, Vishnu. We go directly to worship Vishnu. We don't worship the demigods. We don't want to get confused and lost. We go straight to the Supreme Lord. Prabhupada says in the purport of 27, human life is thus made successful by pleasing Narayan and getting entrance into the direct association of Narayan in the spiritual kingdom of Vaikuntha. So if we begin to worship different demigods, we can easily go off track and get confused. Prabhupada was very clear. Just keep away, keep them out. Okay, so Lord Brahma is doing the yajna, and the enjoyer of the sacrifice is the Supreme Lord. But at the same time, Lord Brahma had to take the different items for performing the yajna. He took everything from the body of the Lord, from the Lord's creation. So he's satisfying the Lord with what is actually his. Another example Prabhupada would often give is how a little child may get money from his parents, and then he goes and buys something to give a present to his parents. And so the money came from the parents, but the child brought the gift and gave it to the parents. Will the parents be pleased? Yeah, certainly they'll be pleased that, oh, my little child has brought this present for me, how nice. They will appreciate so much. So the same way, in this world, we take everything which is actually Krishna's, it's all his property, and we're offering it back to him for his pleasure, for his enjoyment. All right, so we hear more. Text number 30. So the Supreme Lord, he's the maintainer, but by the will of the Lord, Brahma is empowered that he can create and Shiva can destroy. They're given these different powers. This is the arrangement of the Lord. He doesn't like to do everything himself, so he empowers his agents like Brahma and Shiva to do things on his behalf. That's described in text number 32. Brahma is saying he creates, Shiva destroys, but it's all done under the direction of the Supreme Lord, Vishnu, or Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, who is actually being recognized here in this as the Puruṣa-sūkta. The Lord who's being worshipped by the Puruṣa-sūkta is actually Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, and Lord Brahma is offering his prayers. Of course, Lord Brahma, he's born from the lotus flower, which comes from Garbhodakashayi Vishnu's navel. So he's the worshipable deity of Lord Brahma. Okay, then the chapter goes on, text 33, we begin to hear more about Brahma explaining that Lord Vishnu's potencies are inconceivable and nobody can actually estimate them. They're beyond everyone's power of understanding. Brahma's talking to Narada, my dear son, whatever you inquire from me, I have explained unto you. You should know whatever there is, both in the material and spiritual world, is dependent on the Supreme Lord. So this is Brahma's realization. He's understood there's nothing independent of the Lord. It's not like Narada. Narada was thinking his father was the Supreme Lord, but Lord Brahma is pointing out to him that Lord Brahma, he meditates on the Supreme Lord, who is far above him and far beyond his power even of understanding. So Lord Brahma is describing how we have to take shelter of the Lord and how we have to approach him. In text 34, he describes how we should perform this devotional service. He said, with great zeal, we should, in other words, we should be very enthusiastic and very energetic and very eager for every opportunity to engage in the Lord's service. And Lord Brahma describes the effect, the benefits of being engaged in the service of the Lord. He said that my senses are never degraded by temporary attachment to matter, nor is the progress of my mind ever deterred. And whatever I say has never proved to have been false. So this is the power of engaging in devotional service of the Lord. Brahma is experiencing that, the benefits that everything, because he's dedicated himself to the Lord, so everything he says is the absolute truth. And he's speaking the words of the scriptures. And we read the Brahma Samhita. And what does Lord Brahma say? Govindamadi Puruṣam tamaham bhajami. So Lord Brahma, he whatever he says, there's no fault, it's the absolute truth. And his mind is always fixed in the service of the Lord. His senses are never degraded by attachment to the matter. So this is the result of being fully situated in Krishna consciousness, that we will be protected. Whatever we try to do for the service of the Lord, it will be glorious. We may not be successful, just like Lord Nityananda went to preach on behalf of Lord Chaitanya. He went to Jagai and Madhai to preach. And he was not successful. But he made the attempt, and that attempt was glorious. Although in the first attempt he failed, in the second attempt he was successful. So a devotee is not discouraged. Rather, the attempt to serve Krishna is glorious. Even though we may not come up to the full standard of the great devotee, you know, we may not experience bhava or prema, but because we're making the attempt, that in itself is glorious. So we should be convinced about that. So Lord Brahma is telling Narada like this. Prabhupada said this is also a very important verse actually. Text number 34. He said, anyone who is earnestly serious in heart and soul about being in intimate touch with the personality of Godhead in the relationship of loving service will always be infallible in words and action. So this is very important to remember. But then Prabhupada contrasts that. He said, on the other hand, if you're just mental speculator, if you're just a mental speculator, then what good will you get? You will not get anywhere. Everything will be just useless labor. So then Brahma talks about his own life. He said, I may be known as the great Brahma, and I did a lot of austerities, and I'm expert in mystic powers and self-realization. I'm recognized by the forefathers. They offered me obeisances. He said, but still I cannot understand him, that Lord who is the very source of my birth. So it doesn't matter how great you are, whatever material qualifications you may have, it's never enough to qualify you to actually know the Lord. This is the point. No materialist can actually understand the Lord. He only reveals himself to his devotees. And so Lord Brahma is urging everyone by these words. He's urging and his son Narada, and of course we are coming in the line from Narada Muni, that we should all surrender to him. We should take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. And then Lord Brahma continues in the next verse, in text 36. He said, I may not know about the Lord. He said, the Lord even doesn't know about himself. He said, even the Lord himself is unable to estimate his own limits. Now, how is it possible the Lord cannot understand his own limits? The point is that he knows himself, but then he expands himself because he's always increasing and expanding his powers. So he expands himself a bit more, and then he knows himself, but then he expands himself more. And then he comes to know himself, and then he's expanding himself more. It's going on continually. He's never able to fully to know himself, because you never reach a static situation. The Lord's glories, the Lord's powers are always increasing, always expanding, like that. So even the Lord himself cannot know his own position. Then 37, neither Shiva nor you nor I could know the limits of spiritual happiness. How can other demigods know it? Right? The Brahma, Shiva and Narada, these are all Mahajans, they're great devotees. So these other demigods, you know, how can they know the Lord? Well, they're not equal to people like Brahma and Shiva and Narada. You know, they're very, very great special personalities. The material demigods, and the Swarga Loka and so on, you know, they're nothing compared to Brahma and Shiva and Narad. So we want to understand the supreme position of the Lord. So therefore Lord Brahma says in 38, let us offer our obeisances unto that Lord, whose incarnation and activities are chanted by us for glorification, though he can hardly be fully known as he is. So although we can't know him fully, it doesn't mean we shouldn't worship him. Of course, we should worship him according to our own ability, and we will realize whatever we can of him. And gradually, when the Lord is pleased with us, he can reveal more of himself to us. And the Lord can reveal. That the process is revelation. The Lord reveals himself to us. It's not that we ourselves can go and directly perceive the Lord. The Lord has to reveal himself to us. Then we can actually understand him. But as we heard, he's always increasing. So you have to continually surrender more and more. It's an ongoing process. So there's no end to the process of devotional service. We have to continue our chanting more and more. So text 39 then continues. Mahavishnu, the Lord expands into his plenary portion as Mahavishnu, and he creates this manifested cosmos, but he is unborn. The creation takes place in him, and the material substance and manifestation are all himself. He maintains them for some time and absorbs them into himself again. So the material creation is described, the process of creation, then maintenance, and then annihilation. Everything comes out from the body of Mahavishnu, and after some time then it all goes back in again into the body of Mahavishnu. This is the nature of the material world. And that process of creation, that is just simply one breath of Mahavishnu. So we understand the material creation to be like this. The lifetime of Brahma, which we consider great, is just simply one breath of Mahavishnu. So Prabhupada talks a lot about the impersonalists and their conception of the creation, how they understand everything, how they see everything without form. And when we talk about form, they think it means impersonal forms. At the end of the purport of text 39, Prabhupada writes, so this Mahavishnu is the first incarnation in the creation. And from him, all the universes are generated and all material manifestations are produced, one after another. The causal ocean is created by the Lord as a Mahatattva, as a cloud in the spiritual sky, and is only a part of his different manifestations. The spiritual sky is an expansion of his personal rays, and he is the Mahatattva cloud also. He lies down and generates the universes by his breathing, and again by entering into each universe as Garbhodakshayi Vishnu, he creates Brahma, Shiva, and many other demigods for maintenance of the universe, and again absorbs the whole thing into his person, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. The conclusion is that these are all but displays of the Lord's inconceivable personal energies, of which no one can have any full information. This point we have already discussed. So we can have some information, but we're not going to have full information. That is the point. We have to understand how limited we are to understand the Lord, the energy of the Lord. And if we're so limited to understand the Lord's energy, then how much more limited we are to understand the Lord himself as a person. How he's so far beyond our ability to understand everything. So then Lord Brahma goes on in text 40-41 to glorify the Supreme Lord, describing his qualities. And he encourages Narada that he should also take shelter of the Lord. The Prabhupada's purports are quite extensive on these things, encouraging all of us to take to devotional service, to take the shelter of devotional service. We hear about Karanodakashayi Vishnu in text 42, one of the Lord's Purusha avatars, the first Purusha avatar. Prabhupada writes in the purport there of 41-42, so the temporary creation of the material manifestation is an exhibition of the material energy of the Lord. And to manage the whole show, the Supreme Lord incarnates himself as Karanodakashayi Vishnu, just as a magistrate is deputed by the government to manage affairs temporarily. This Karanodakashayi Vishnu causes the manifestation of material creation by looking over his material energy. So like that, a nice example Prabhupada gives, the magistrate and the government. The government put the magistrate to manage affairs. So the same way the Lord appoints Karanodakashayi Vishnu to look over the affairs of the material creation. Because as we heard, right, this material creation is not very dear to the Lord. Bina prakriter ashtada. That is his separated energy. So the Lord is not too much concerned, but nevertheless it's his creation, and so he puts the magistrate here, Karanodakashayi Vishnu. And then we hear about Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, it goes on in the purport. Garbhodakashayi Vishnu and all living beings, both moving and standing, which come out of the second incarnation, all become manifested. Ultimately, all these creative elements and the creation itself are but manifestations of the Supreme Lord's potency. Nothing is independent of the control of the Supreme Being. This first incarnation in the material creation, namely Karanarnavashayi Vishnu, is the plenary part of the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. And that's described in the Brahma Samhita also. Yashyaikanisvasi kalamatavalamya jivanti loma vilajak jagadandanata vishnor mahansa yashya kala vishesho govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. All the universes are maintained only during the breathing period of Mahavishnu, who is only a plenary portion of Govinda, the original personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. And then we hear Lord Brahma continues, describes the situation, how Lord Shiva, Lord Vishnu, great generators of beings like Daksha and Prajapati, and even Narada and the Kumaras, and demigods like Indra and Chandra, so many, the leaders of the Charana planets, the leaders of the Yakshas and Rakshasas, the great sages, even dead bodies, evil spirits, great aquatics, beasts, birds, everything, anything which is possessed of power, which has any kind of strength or forgiveness or beauty or opulence, it is just simply due to the Supreme Lord. It's only a fragment of the potency of the Supreme Lord. So as we said at the end of the 10th chapter, the same thing, a single fragment of the Lord. So we see this in the material world. Everything in this material world, we're thinking very powerful, very great, very opulent, very beautiful. It is all just a tiny fragment of the potency of the Supreme Lord. So the chapter finishes with Lord Brahma encouraging Narada. He encourages Narada to hear about the Lord, because by hearing about the Lord, then we can counteract all the contamination within the heart. And the way to hear about the Lord is by hearing about his different incarnations, his different avatars. And that is the subject matter of the next chapter. We will hear about all the different incarnations of the Lord, the different functions. Okay, are there any questions?
Hare Krishna, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Maharaj, for a beautiful class. Maharaj, as you were describing the nature of the spiritual world, that women and men, although they are so much beautiful, but they are more attached to the Lord, to the service of the Lord, and they are not bewildered by each other's beauty. So, Maharaj, is there a spiritual gender, an eternal spiritual gender of a living entity? Because either we are women or men in the spiritual world. Is it like...
Yes, in the spiritual world, there's gopis and there's gopas. We know. In Vaikuntha also, there's families. There's men and women. So there are genders. There is the opposite sexes, we know. Krishna has the cowherd boys who are with him in the daytime. He has the gopis who are with him in the night.
Okay, thank you very much, Maharaj. So, Maharaj, is there a way to maybe understand our own spiritual gender?
Our spiritual gender is servant. Krishna is the master. He's the supreme male, and we're all servants of Krishna. That is our spiritual gender. We should think of ourselves as a servant. Now, it doesn't matter whether man or woman, that's not important. The important point is we are all servant of Krishna. There's only one male in the spiritual world. Everyone else is we're all Prakriti. He's the Purusha. We're all the Prakriti. We're meant for his enjoyment. That is the position.
Thank you very much.
Any other question?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Have question. In the purport of Srila Prabhupada purport on text 42, they mention Karana Vasai and Karana Dokasai. This same?
Yes, same.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you so much Maharaj. Puruṣa-sūkta, such a nice topic indeed. One of the questions though in mind is, please correct me if the understanding is wrong. So karmis, jnanis, devotees, everyone maybe look at the Virat Rupa, universal form, Vishvarupa, but then because the consciousness is different, then the way we all understand or maybe going forward perceive the idea, and then where the devotees get to the devotional service practically, as you mentioned. But so it feels like the key word is consciousness, and Srila Prabhupada also put together ISKCON, which is the Institute of Krishna Consciousness. So Maharaj, how do we understand consciousness from the Vedic perspective? Because a lot in modern science has been said about consciousness, but we just say keep Krishna in the center and that's it. So how to understand the word consciousness from Krishna consciousness point of view, Maharaj, please?
Well, consciousness, we should understand, it is not some material combination of chemicals. Consciousness is a symptom of the soul. Consciousness comes from the soul. Right? How do we identify, how do we perceive the soul? By consciousness. Just as the sun is present by the sunlight. So the same way the soul is perceived through consciousness. So our original consciousness is Krishna consciousness. But our consciousness becomes covered. It becomes polluted, becomes covered by contact with the material energy and forgetfulness of Lord Krishna. So we have to revive that consciousness, the original consciousness, which is originally pure. The example is given that just like the rain, when it falls from the sky, it's actually pure water. But as soon as it contacts the ground, it becomes contaminated. So in a similar manner, our consciousness is originally pure, but we contact the material energy and we become polluted, we become forgetful, we fall into forgetfulness of Krishna. So we cultivate our consciousness of Krishna through the process of bhakti yoga, by hearing and chanting. And in this way, the remembrance of Lord Krishna comes naturally into the heart. So that consciousness is like the awareness, the constant feeling and concern for Krishna. It said the gopis were always conscious, thinking about Krishna. Where is Krishna? He's in the fields, he's walking in the field, the ground, there's thorns and there's stones, it will be hurting his feet. Oh, Krishna's poor soft feet on the ground. They're thinking like this. And they're thinking, when is Krishna coming home? Is it time for him to come home yet? And they will look at the sun and see, is the sun setting? Oh, Krishna will be coming soon. In this way, they're constantly thinking of Krishna. So this is consciousness. We consider this is pure consciousness, to be conscious of Krishna. Of course, we first of all have to be conscious of ourselves as a soul. Before we can become Krishna conscious, we have to understand we have to understand our own nature as a spiritual being, as a spiritual soul. So that consciousness there, that I'm not the body, our consciousness is polluted and we identify with the body. We're thinking, I'm a man, there's a woman, We're thinking, I'm young or I'm old. This is all the body consciousness. We have to understand what is pure consciousness. That is to understand I'm a soul. I'm an eternal spiritual being, part and parcel of Lord Krishna. So Prabhupada would often bring people up to the spiritual platform by immediately reminding them that we're not the body. You know, they'd ask Prabhupada, how old are you? Prabhupada would say, I'm the same age as you. I'm a soul. And immediately he would bring them to the spiritual platform. They were looking at Prabhupada as some elderly gentleman. But Prabhupada talked, I'm a soul, just as you are a soul. So this is consciousness, to understand our spiritual identity.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Maharajji. Maharajji, just a follow-up on that. So consciousness is thinking, being aware of Krishna. But then who is doing that thinking in us? Is it the body, the mind? Because the mind is material itself. Consciousness is the symptom of soul. Soul is Satchitananda, the complete, eternal, conscious, spiritual. Then the material mind is being the conscious of the spiritual being. So we are trying to understand the spiritual from material senses.
So we have to when we use the mind to think of Krishna, then the mind becomes spiritualized. That's not material. When the mind is thinking of Krishna, then you're bringing the mind to the spiritual platform. The mind is subtle, right? The mind is subtle. So that mind can be the friend, it can be the enemy, remember? So that when we think of Krishna, then the mind is a friend. This is bringing the mind to the pure platform, to pure consciousness, spiritual consciousness. Using the mind to think of Krishna, to remember Krishna. And that pure mind will become part of the spiritual body. You can go back, you don't have to give up the spiritual body. The spiritual body goes back to Godhead. So within the spiritual body, there's a spiritual mind. There's also thinking. It's not that because you have a spiritual body you don't think. We do think. So there is something which functions like a mind within the spiritual body.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for your patience. All right. Thank you so much.
Yes? Any other question? Okay, so then we'll stop here today and we'll meet tomorrow again.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. The wonderful class.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yes.
Go back to Vrinda ki jai.
Jai.